Hi, welcome to my video titled Violence Against Prison Staff, an amateur's review. My name is Carl Torspens. I'm a former deputy warden of the Arizona and New Mexico Department of Corrections. I have a little bit of experience, approximately 25 years in both systems combined, and I've been looking at the factors behind the violence against staff assaults for a couple of years now, and find that the brief conducted by the National Institute of Corrections titled Violence Against Prison Staff, cataloged on December 17, 2013, is about the most accurate document that explains how certain factors are related to the assault of staff by prisoners, and that by reading the NIC, I am concerned that because it's such an important issue, the appropriate steps have not been taken by all systems to properly address this most interesting topic. Thus, I've decided to follow and participate in a LinkedIn group participatory discussion, as I've read the NIC outline on the subject matter and found it to be in agreement with many of the factors brought forth that I know exist of such events. And as staff assaults are dynamic and fluid in most cases, the breakdown of the three approaches mentioned in the NIC report, which are importational, deprivation, and situational, carries much of the burdens that we need to address and implement protective and preventive measures to reduce such incidents from happening. I fear that although this brief sheds light on a very important subject, management has not yet picked up on its urgency in some cases and neglected to follow up with these kind of informational briefs to gain insight on their own culture and practices related to the causes of staff assaults and violence within their own facilities. I hope I'm wrong, but statistically and news-wise, these assaults appear to be on the increase. And, as one would hope, officer safety should be number one priority for all of us. Historically speaking, most research is focused on prison violence in two categories, or two approaches: importational and deprivation. The importational approach suggests violence is related to the individual and who they are or who they were before entering prison. Variances in factors such as age, ethnicity, educational level, substance abuse, and correctional facility history are often used to explain prison violence and behavior. This approach subscribes to the notion that prisoners bring attitudes and subculture violence to the prison when incarcerated. Deprivation approach suggests violence is related to the deprivation experienced in the institutional environment. Factors often considered in this explanation include temperature, staff, location of incident, and the prison housing block or housing assignment. More recently, research into prison violence has emphasized on the situational approach. I believe myself, having always been a strong advocate of making situational awareness assessments, this approach looks at the impact that what situation factors have the offenders used to adjusting the prison environment and to suit their own needs. The mechanisms of prisoner on staff violence differ greatly from prison to prison violence. However, because it makes it so difficult to find a uniform explanation for violence inside prisons, it is important to realize that most of these are commonplace no matter what system you pick. One of the most obvious considerations is the vast power difference between the keeper and the keepers. In other words, between staff and the prisoners. This relationship will and always results in volatile situations and disagreements that could trigger such violence. The range of victimizing behaviors frequently seen in prisoner-on-prisoner violence differ to those used on officers. These include prisoners psychologically manipulating staff, or on the other hand, impulsive physical violence aimed at anyone in position of an authority. Remember that when you look at the actual incident of the violence that occurred, you have to decide whether it was spontaneous, planned, or impulsive. Looking at the importational deprivation factors, let's look at that. When you bring an offender with a history of violence, whether they were youthful at the time or whether they are older, it suggests that this has a big role in how they act when they're incarcerated. In other words, their history of violence is significantly much likely to predict future violence. And although some people will say that this doesn't support anything scientifically or evidence based, it has been reported that those with a history of violence were 4 times more likely to perform or to engage into an act of violence than those nonviolent offenders that are in for property crimes, and to perpetuate serious assaults against staff. Now, that's 4 times higher. So it does suggest that those with a history of violence should be identified and taken into consideration for preventive measures to reduce staff. Another importational factor is their age. A number of studies have point that prisoner-on-prisoner violence and prisoner-on-staff violence can and is likely to be committed by individuals 25 years or younger. Now, we already admit that most of the prisoners today are showing a age range or age factor anywhere between 20 and 39, and although that is a lengthy continuum of age group, research found that the younger prisoners are responsible for more serious assaults. So we need to focus on the fact that when you put young people together, this is a high propensity or potential for violence among them, just based on pre-indicators of misconduct. Also remember that research has linked drug use as a likelihood of reason of assaults against staff, because we already know that when someone takes drugs or uses drugs or sells drugs, they have a mind-altering type of state of mind, and results show that if you reduce the drug use in a particular population, it also reduces prisoner on staff assaults by over half, or 50%. Now, that is the importational approach of prison violence. Going back, we're looking at history of violence, age, and the use of drugs or drug abuse. Looking at the second approach, deprivation approach factors, it becomes to light, according to the study on the NIC report, that there are findings that support that violent prisoners are unavoidable. The degree of institutional violence is not dependent on the prisoners, but rather is a direct product of prison conditions and how the state operates its conditions. Although that can be debated, it is a fact that when you look at the case-by-case incidents of prison violence, you'll find out that there are several key elements that need to be taken into consideration, and that is the location, whether the incident took place in a detention unit or a high security maximum custody area housing unit, or whether management played a role in the deprivation part of the prison approach or prison evaluation assessment of conditions, and whether such condition can lead to an increase of violence just purely based on the conditions and the environment that is set up by management staff. It has also been suggested that because of budget concerns and budget reductions, programs have been reduced in many different areas in many different states, and evidence seems to suggest that if you have an academic and vocational educational program in place, they are successful tools in promoting institutional order and reducing violence to some large degree. Now, whether or not this is directly in correlation with other issues such as staffing levels, it remains to be seen with further research, but it has been determined that most of your individual and group violence against staff are found to be minor in nature, such as throwing liquids or spitting or, what we call fisticuffs or fighting. However, the serious assaults were more likely when other staff were present. So um, it appears to be situational, which is something that we need to really take into consideration as a third approach. Staff inexperience is another factor that we need to look at, and the lack of prevention strategies is probably the most lacking of strategies in targeting offender attitudes and drug use, which have been mentioned in this review, that are strong contributors to the um, element of prison violence. The violence reduction strategy is to attain a group of strategies to reduce prison staff assaults, but should include how units are functioning, eliminating blind spots, reduce overcrowding, increase staff training and experience, support staff authority, mass shakedowns, security um, shakedowns or crackdowns on contraband, weapons and drugs and cell phones, and increasing prisoner access to programs and industries. So ironically, when you look at the whole picture, it seems like the answer to this is pretty much here in front of our noses, but it takes money to do what these strategies and what these recommendations are making to agency administrators and executive officers of the state. As always, take this information and content in context. It is not an absolute. It is my opinion. It is my inference. It's my, to some degree, my biased approach on prison violence. And I thank you for watching my video.